The meeting was born in a bout of frustration, and I had expected that Adon would be the first and foremost in the front of the group. Adon wrote a paper that he sent around to a lot of us that he already had the title of it before he had the paper, Interpretations of Quantum Theory, a Map of Madness. And in an early draft of that, so this doesn't appear in the final paper, but in an early draft of it, he had this classification of various interpretations. You'll notice that on the right-hand side we see the Copenhagen interpretation, relational interpretation, QBism, John Wheeler's ideas, Anton Zeilinger's ideas, Czeslaw Bruckner's ideas, and he writes non-realist. Non-realist, for God's sake. That pissed me off. And it pissed me, all of you know by now, when I get pissed off, what do? I write email, and I write a lot of it, and I hound you and I bother you, and in the case of Adon, I sent him a note saying, please don't call us non-realist in print. We've endured enough hardship because of that damned label. So I've been trying to develop, as all of you know, the Bayesian view of quantum theory for ever since 1993. And the first and foremost criticism is, well, this is solipsism from physicists. But more refined philosophers will say, well, this is just instrumentalism. Or they might say, this is anti-realism. And all my life, I have felt like what I was really seeking is an understanding of the world. And you would hear someone who actually is unabashedly who would call himself a positivist, Asher Perez, the no interpretation, he's referring to Asher Perez there. Asher would say he's a recalcitrant positivist, and it's not our business to say what is the character of the world. But I had always viewed my own efforts as actually an attempt at saying something deep about the world. And I thought that that was really the same of, let's say, Czeslaw there. He's in this list as well, but I didn't think that he was just trying to say some form of anti-realism or some form of just instrumentalism. And I felt that of John Wheeler for sure. So this is why it angered me. Well, I have another habit that I do is once I've written an email that I'm rather pleased with and someone needs a paper for me for conference proceedings, then I turn it into a paper itself. So anyway, I wrote this paper, and that was really the roots of the idea of this meeting. I vetted that paper by some rather high-class philosophers. Chris Timpson is one out there. One that was particularly important to me, and let's see if I can pull this off without cracking, was Bill Dimopoulos. Bill was a big part of my philosophical life. I don't know how many of you know, but he passed away last Sunday. I sent Bill the paper, I think before it appeared on the web, and Bill wrote back, I read your attached paper on participatory realism, and I found it is very clarifying. The separation of your view from Di Finetti's is very useful since it shows that, unlike Di Finetti, you don't view all the principles of probability as merely principles of rationality. Now that's not quite right, but nonetheless. There is an empirical element to your preferred formulation of the Born rule, that is, an element that is contributed by an empirical theory. And unlike Asher Perez, you think that quantum mechanics has a deep truth to convey about the nature of reality. To this extent, your view is a species of realism and not a knockoff of positivism. I think where we differ is over where we locate what quantum mechanics is instrumental, pardon the pun, in enabling us to see about reality. This was a great triumph. There was a philosopher who looked at my emails, papers, and said, oh, it's not actually solipsism, anti-realism, instrumentalism. That was passing the first test. Another philosopher that I vetted this with in a rather interesting way was David Wallace. David Wallace was going to a meeting that I couldn't attend, and I asked David, would you give a talk on QBism? You can say any mean, nasty thing that you would like to say about it, but if you would just convey the ideas, that would be good enough for me, and I would appreciate it. It turns out David gave a talk titled A Case for QBism, where he played the game. So I inserted the word hypothetical. He played the game that suppose he were indeed dissatisfied with the Everettian view of quantum theory, or suppose, just for the sake of argument, he thought it was incoherent. Well, then what would he say about QBism under that hypothetical? Now, he certainly believes that the Everettian view is coherent and the most satisfying view. But he played this game. And he gave what looks like it was a wonderful talk. I wasn't there, but I think Miguel was there. Particularly, the way he presented it was that QBism was in opposition to something he called representationalism. And so he put QBism in opposition to representationalism and then pointed out some objections that don't work, that it's solipsism. Well, he says, only if we make the question-begging commitment to third-party representationalism. This is instrumentalism, and he says this isn't any instrumentalism I'm familiar with. So I figure if these two good philosophers would say that QBism is some variety of realism, he would say that of Chaslov's forming views and Marcus Müller's forming views and Richard Healy's forming points of view. I'm not quite sure. Relevant topics for this meeting, I don't know. I hope we have discussions about all kinds of things. About John Wheeler's ideas, you see with the big Q. Michel Bitball will give us a talk on the connections between French philosophy and his views of quantum theory. Adán Cabello will talk about, or he'll discuss reconstructions of quantum theory. And Matthias Kleinman, actually, will talk about reconstructions of quantum theory from some principles. Anyway, lots of things. An equation that's near and dear to my heart. Hans Briegel will tell us whether an ant is an agent or whether an ant is not an agent. Giulio Chiarbella may talk about things. And Karen Barad will talk about Niels Bohr's views of things. The sort of thing that I hope is an overarching conversation here. I'll just give you one long extended quote and we'll call it quits. And I think this is reflective of the subjects of several of the talks. In around 2006 or so, Carlton Caves, Rudiger Schack, and I wrote a paper where we introduced the term facts for the agent. In conversation with the referee of that paper, the referees, and I don't know this for sure, but I have a feeling that the referee actually was Bill Dimopoulos that we talked about before. At least there were some hints that it might have been Dimopoulos. The referee writes, you write, the occurrence or non-occurrence of an event is a fact for the agent. Facts are objective, they are not functions of the agent's beliefs. Then he asks, what work precisely is the modifier for the agent supposed to be doing here? It comes across as slightly odd to say that the occurrence is a fact for the agent, and then go on to emphasize the non-dependence of these facts on the agent. Of course, there's no inconsistency here. Apparently, facts are facts for everybody, on your view. But still, the way you put things here strikes me as misleading somehow. We replied, this paper does not emphasize it, but no, we do not mean the facts we are talking about here are facts for everybody. We mean that the facts too are personal, though in a very careful sense. A better exposition would have emphasized the full setting of our view, and then we listed 4 points, and then finally said, point number 5, we do not go any further than points 1 through 4 warrant by giving the data obtained in a quantum measurement an autonomous existence, for instance, as something beyond the agent's sensations. That would run into inconsistencies in a Wigner's friend scenario. Nonetheless, quantum measurement outcomes are beyond the control of the agent. They are only born in the interaction, or I think Karen Barad might say something like in the intra-action, and thus are not functions of the agent in the way that his degrees of belief are. The degrees of belief find their source in the agent, the subject. The outcomes find their source in the external quantum system, the object, but the outcomes lead back to the agent in that they are personal to him. I think this is what I'm trying to capture with the term participatory realism, that outcomes of quantum measurements aren't things that are out there for all to see. They're not facts for everybody, but they're facts for the observer, facts for the agent, or maybe in Chaslov's terminology, they're not facts of the world. Chaslov will give us a talk on a subject like this. Renato Renner will give us a talk on this subject. Richard Healy, I believe, in part will be giving us a talk on this subject. So I think this is one of the key themes of the meeting. More generally, throughout, try to think about how you can build the discussion best. We only have 5 hours of talks each day, 5 to 5.5. And the rest of the time, I hope you'll take advantage of the beautiful grounds out here, or the nature preserve out, is it that way? That way. There's great places for walking and talking and discussing and debating. As you're listening to the talks, I hope you'll use the sticky pads that are on your desks. If a question comes to mind, or a discussion topic comes to mind that would be relevant for discussion during the panel discussions, write it on the little sticky pad, and then during the coffee break, come over here and stick it here. And let's build up a lively debate. Look at what other people are writing. I'll give a prize, either a big beer or a bottle of wine, for the question or topic I find the funniest. So that's going to require a little work on your part. Anyway, plan ahead for the panel discussions. We should introduce Bill Thisdell, who is back there filming things. Bill has aspirations to make a documentary on some slosh or mess or some combination of all that we're talking about here. And he will be approaching some number of you for interviews. I hope you can make time for him. The interviews would probably run about 30 minutes, something like that, a piece. He may not have enough time just by our breaks, so that means some talks, if you find that there's a talk you want to miss anyway, then go up to Bill and say, well, you know, like Marcus right there, Marcus says, well, I don't want to listen to Fuchs's talk. Bill, I'll take the interview now. So feel free to do that. I hope you'll ask big questions at this meeting. I hope we'll do something big. And the bigger we do, presumably the funders of this meeting will think more of it. And maybe even Lenny Suskind will pay attention to some of these ideas. What's a big question? What's an example of a big question? I like this little dialogue that occurred in the early 70s when John Wheeler had given a talk. I don't exactly recall where. Wheeler said something in the discussion period. He said, it's difficult to escape asking a challenging question. Is the entirety of existence, rather than being built on particles or fields of force or multidimensional geometry, built upon billions of elementary quantum phenomena, those elementary acts of observer participancy, those most ethereal of all the entities that have been forced upon us by the progress of science? There was a theologian in the audience, Richard Elvey, who said, Dr. Wheeler, who was there to observe the universe when it started? Were we there? Or does it only start with our observation? Is the Big Bang here? Wheeler said, a lovely way to put it, and I can imagine him saying this, a lovely way to put it, is the Big Bang here? I can imagine that we will someday have to answer your question with a yes. Each elementary quantum phenomenon is an elementary act of fact creation. That is incontestable. But is that the only mechanism needed to create all that is what took place at the Big Bang, the consequence of billions upon billions of these elementary processes, these elementary acts of observer participancy, these quantum phenomena. Have we had the mechanism of creation before our eyes all the time without recognizing the truth? that is the larger question implicit in your comment. And I think in a way it captures what this meeting is about. And let's go to work at it.